morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today to say a few words about Veterans Day. I'm afraid part of my talk is copying the last gentleman's talk, but he mentioned World War I and how it ended on the 11th month, the 11th day, and the 11th hour. So exactly 104 years ago, right to this very hour, that great war officially ended. Now, if you study this subject a little further, you will find that much fighting continued long after 11 a.m. due to the communication issues back then. Now, if Mr. Joseph Von Deck were here today, he could easily elaborate on that for a 2-hour lecture on that very subject. Now, when that war ended, it was called Armistice Day. Since that title was declared, many changes have taken place on observing this day that we currently call Veterans Day. It was not always observed on November 11th. It was not until 1954 under President Eisenhower that this day was declared Veterans Day. In 1968, Veterans Day was observed on a Monday, like other holidays, giving people a longer weekend. It wasn't until 1978 that Veterans Day was officially observed on November 11th. Now, all these dates are good to know, but what we all need to remember is what American veterans have given this country with service in the military. With the new addition of the United States Space Force, there are now 6 branches in the military. It's also important to remember the Merchant Marines, who are also considered veterans. I unloaded ammunition off Merchant Marine ships in Vietnam. They certainly deserve our recognition, as well as the need to recognize all veterans of all branches who have served. It's also important to us all to remember all the veterans organizations who support our veterans, their families, and their communities. To name just a few, we have the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, the Disabled American Veterans, the Vietnam Veterans of America, and thankfully we have the Ladies Auxiliary organizations who do a lot for our vets. And today, we should remember the riders, the motorcycle riders, who also do much for the veterans. A few weeks ago, I entered a store. 2 young boys looked at me and said, "Thank you, sir, for your service." I realized they saw the baseball cap I was wearing, showing I was a veteran. I also realized right away they were taught, more likely, by their parents to recognize veterans and to thank them for their service. What a wonderful thing to do. I want to mention a little bit about World War II and Korean veterans today. Today, if a World War II veteran served toward the end of the war, he or she were just 17 years old at that time. Today they'd be 94 years old. Right behind them are the Korean veterans who are almost that same age. I want to share with you something my wife and I did some years back. We have a World War II vet friend who has passed on now. His name was Joe LaJoy. He lived in Gardner. And we asked him if we could interview him. And he said yes, and we put it on tape, and we ended up posting it to YouTube so his family could have this remembrance forever. As long as YouTube exists, they can go on there and hear his story. Joe was a skipper on a landing craft in World War II that made 8 major landings, including Iwo Jima and Leyte, and 6 other significant landings. He received 8 Bronze Stars. And recently, his daughter contacted me saying, "What do you know about my dad? Because I heard that you have talked to him." I said, "All you got to do is go on YouTube. It's right there." And his granddaughter was totally thrilled. She did a report on it at school of what her grandfather did in World War II. So my challenge to you, especially you young people, encourage your parents to do this. Go interview a World War II and Korean vet and have it put on tape and put it on YouTube. Long after we're gone, they can still hear about their stories. Recently, I read a quote by an unknown author which said, "I was prepared to serve, I was prepared to be wounded, I was prepared to die. However, when I came home, I was not prepared to be forgotten." I do not believe that any nation in the history of the world has buried its soldiers further from its native soil than we Americans or buried them closer to the towns which they grew up. We celebrate this Veterans Day for a few short minutes, a short moment of silence, and then this country's lives go on. But I think it's most appropriate that we recall on this occasion, and in every other moment when we are faced with great responsibilities, the contribution and the sacrifice which so many men and women and their families have made in order to permit this country to now occupy its present position of responsibility and freedom, and in order to permit us to gather here together today. So please, let us all remember freedom is not free. We owe a debt of gratitude to all men and women who made our freedom possible. Again, thank you everyone for being here today. I appreciate being part of this ceremony. I sincerely hope you all have a great, wonderful day of Veterans Day. Thank you.